Well, diversity, variability, and biodiversity come into play because in order to have fruit that looks and tastes good, growers need varieties that resist insects and disease. Now, how can you understand this? Tomatoes in the store are just a species that's been selected from wild relatives. Well, the key thing is that selection absolutely requires variability. For example, how could you select larger fruit if some fruit weren't larger than other fruit? What a lot of people don't realize is that selection is definitely a two-edged sword. If you select for one thing, you lose something else.
During selection, what we're doing is selecting one type. It might be a plant with large fruit or some other trait that we want, and we're throwing everything else away. So selection is by definition a process of narrowing an original gene pool into something that's a desired characteristic. When tomato was domesticated from its wild ancestors, apparently most of the disease resistances were left behind. So tomato is susceptible to most diseases as well as insect pests that affect tomatoes where they're grown in many regions of the world. So breeders have had to transfer these resistances from wild relatives.
This is where biodiversity comes in, being able to make up for things that were lost, like disease resistance, while selecting for things like bigger fruit. Well, scientists from a lot of different disciplines are trying to understand how biodiversity is maintained and generated. The field sits right at the interface between ecology and genetics. Well, one thing we know is that complex environments are crucial. Local adaptations allow plants to be adapted to a lot of different things. So these local adaptations are crucial for maintaining biodiversity.
Most, especially widespread species, have lots of locally adapted traits, and so they vary. So if you look at a northern Ecuadorian population and a southern Ecuadorian population and a Peruvian population, they share some things in common, which is why we know they're species and they can interbreed with each other. But local adaptation is critical for biodiversity. I think many people think of biodiversity as having individual examples of individual species, and that's sort of a zoo-oriented way of thinking of biodiversity. Oh, if I just have a few of this and a few of that, that's going to capture all of the variation that's out there. But the problem with that idea is that it could apply to some small number of species, but most species have a lot of natural variation. And so if you think about biodiversity, what you really should be thinking about is the totality of species.
We're studying several tomato species. One of the three species that we're studying here in Ecuador is called Solanum habracates. That's the Latin name for it.
So Roger's a happy camper.
Yeah. Bruce has got me figured out.
Yeah. You can make Roger mighty happy with a few acranthum fruits. It's a cheap.
This species has also been interesting for breeders as a source of disease resistance. But tomatoes, when they're grown in the field and in many regions around the world, they're vulnerable to various pests and diseases. And Solanum habracates has been used as a source of resistance to diseases like late blight. This is the disease called Phytophthora infestans that caused the Irish potato famine. We maintain seed of this particular species in our collection at Davis, which is called the Tomato Genetics Resource Center.
Scientists maintain biodiversity in seed banks so that breeders can access it for breeding programs. But what's in seed banks is just a sliver of what's in nature. The real variability, the real biodiversity is in nature.